In the years following the Civil War, the United States federal government did not rely on income taxes to keep its doors open. It was fueled by the sea. The national treasury depended almost entirely on customs duties levied on foreign goods flowing into American ports. To protect a growing domestic agricultural sector, the 1870 Tariff Act established a strict defensive barrier. Imported consumable fruits like oranges, lemons, and pineapples faced a steep 20% tax. But lawmakers knew farmers needed foreign plant varieties to propagate new crops, so they carved out a narrow exemption on the duty-free list, specifically for fruit plants. The living, reproductive flora was free. The edible fruit was taxed. 2 years later, the government revised its trade policies with the Horizontal Tariff Bill of 1872. The drafts were finalized on the congressional floor, and the massive compilation of new schedules sent to the official publisher of federal statutes, Little, Brown and Company, to be cast in lead and printed. Somewhere between the drafting table and the printing press, a tiny typographical mutation occurred within Section 5. The typesetters swapped the intended hyphen in the compound word fruit plants for a comma, and they added a plural S to the word fruit. The published law now read, fruits, plants, tropical, and semi-tropical. By severing the compound word, fruits was no longer an adjective modifying the plants. It had become its own independent item. The text now listed 2 separate coordinate nouns on the duty-free list. Congress had meant to allow breeding stock into the country tax-free. Instead, the printed ink explicitly stated that all imported tropical and semi-tropical fruits were entirely exempt from federal taxation. When the revised tariff schedules officially took effect on August 1, 1872, the merchant class was reading closely. Fruit importers working the docks of major East Coast ports immediately noticed the change. Merchants across New York, Boston, and Philadelphia seized the opportunity. They continued importing highly lucrative shipments of lemons, bananas, and oranges, but they formally declared to the customs houses that their entire cargoes were now duty-free. The importers were not smuggling. They were not committing fraud. They were strictly complying with the exact printed text of the United States statutes at large, which now unequivocally shielded their goods from the heavy import taxes. Thousands of crates of consumable fruit poured onto American docks without generating a single cent of tariff revenue. This created a specific, measurable gap in the customs receipts the government had expected to collect. A carefully constructed protective barrier for American fruit growers had been breached by a single punctuation mark. Panic traveled rapidly up to the Treasury Department. Refusing to accept the loss, the Secretary of the Treasury fired off administrative circulars to port collectors, instructing them to ignore the typo entirely and keep levying the taxes on imported fruit. The government argued that the intent of Congress was clearly to protect American farmers, and that this obvious legislative goal easily outweighed a minor transcription mistake made in a printing room. The merchants countered with the legal doctrine of statutory literalism. They paid the heavy duties under formal protest, kept meticulous ledgers, and systematically filed federal lawsuits, arguing that the published text of the law is the only thing that governs tax liability. The federal courts had a long-established precedent of refusing to rewrite clear, unambiguous statutory language simply to rescue lawmakers from sloppy drafting. The text was plain, and the government's legal defense was doomed. By December 1874, facing insurmountable legal odds, the Treasury Department formally surrendered. They agreed to admit the fruit duty-free and ordered the retroactive refund of all the taxes collected under protest while the errant comma was in effect. In this instance, the literal printed letter of the law proved far more binding than the unwritten intent of the lawmakers who drafted it. Congress had actually moved to close the loophole earlier that year. On May 9, 1874, they passed a highly specific, targeted act that scrubbed the comma and legally restored the hyphen. But it was a prospective fix. It could not stop the retroactive bleeding from the imports that had already arrived. Today, popular internet histories often blame this entire ordeal on an overworked, coffee-deprived clerk toiling away in the Capitol. But contemporary records point away from a tired scribe. The evidence indicates it was an honest transcription mistake made externally by the official publishing contractor. Then there is the widespread modern legend that this single comma cost the Treasury exactly $2 million. But compared to actual historical records, contemporary on-the-record estimates during the congressional debates place the immediate loss at around $500,000. While a fraction of the total budget, this $500,000 loss represented a significant unintended shortfall in expected revenue from the fruit trade. That $500,000 figure was entered into the public record by Senator John Sherman of Ohio. He personally hunted through the draft keepers to find the source of the typo, standing before the Senate to acknowledge the sheer, expensive absurdity of what had just happened to the country's finances. The total financial math of the $2 million comma may have grown into a legend over the last century, but its legal legacy is absolute. It remains a permanent reminder that in the eyes of the justice system, a punctuation mark wields the exact same binding power as the words it stands next to.